Life Audio.
Hello, and welcome to the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I am your host, John Seidel. This is your home for real stories, radical vulnerability, and remarkable comebacks. In the end, this podcast is a place for the desperate, the downtrodden, the destitute, and especially the drunk. But it's also a place of hope and healing. I know that firsthand because I'm the Christian who became an alcoholic, not the other way around. Today, I've found sobriety after decades of struggling. But more importantly than finding sobriety, I found Jesus. My prayer is that as I interview people just like you and just like me, along with professionals in the fields of trauma, faith, and addiction recovery, you will find the peace that is available to you through Christ on the other side of whatever you're going through and whatever addiction that might be. Because let's face it, we're all addicted to something. So welcome. Let's get radically vulnerable as we explore what it looks like to be on this journey of messy sanctification. We'll be right back after this. Are you in an abusive relationship? I don't say that just for shock value, but our guest today wasn't quite the type that you might think. It wasn't with another human, but it was with alcohol. And she wrote a post last year that I found so moving. And it was about being in an abusive relationship with alcohol and finally giving it up. And I think the metaphor is a good one. You know, and I talk a little bit about this in my book that we like alcohol is one of those things that promises us so much and just doesn't deliver, right? And if you, again, think about that metaphor, and again, that's not to minimize anyone who's been in an abusive physical relationship. I have a sister who was, and it was awful. But I think when you look at alcohol, something that just takes and takes and takes and lies and lies and lies and literally does do physical harm to our bodies while promising us something better. I mean, I think the metaphor fits. And so Heidi Mills knows exactly what that is like. And so I found her via Substack, and she had written this really great post probably I think around March or April of 2025. And it was called The Glass Half Empty, Leaving My Most Abusive Relationship, a non-dramatic breakup with alcohol, which is interesting because I think she didn't necessarily have a rock bottom moment, although there was this up and down relationship with alcohol throughout her life. And so in this nearly 4,000 word post, which I've linked in the show notes, and I'm going to read parts of it during the interview as well, I think she details and chronicles what it was like to go through this relationship and then just finally realize, I'm done. Like, I don't need this. And I'm excited for you to hear her story today. Heidi is a certified relationship and life coach. She has a business centered around soul care coaching called Reclaim. And she works especially with middle-aged women on what it looks like to reclaim their lives. And so I'm excited to talk to her today and to bring you her story, because I think a lot of you will be able to relate. And especially I think those of you who, like me for so long, just had this kind of yo-yo back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And so to hear what that kind of to hear Heidi talk about how, like, for so long she just quieted the whispers. Like, there was this ongoing whisper in the back of her head that was like, just give this up, just move on. You don't need this. And she just would work to quiet that. There's talks of relationship trauma In this episode. She talks about an emotional affair that she had to walk through regarding her husband. And finally, I think you'll hear in Heidi's story how the drinking culture has permeated the church more than we realize, right? And that was a reality for me, and I think a reality for a lot of you, that you know, when it comes to drinking in the church, so many people kind of swung the pendulum. And so Heidi will talk about how she was part of a ministry that said, hey, you can drink as long as you don't tell anyone about it. Right. And then, moving to Texas, where, beer and barbecue was just interchangeable. And so I think it's a reminder a little bit of how we need to reframe some of that conversation in the church today. First, if you are looking for some resources for your own recovery, why don't you head on over to veritasrecovery.org, veritasrecovery.org. That is the new nonprofit ministry that I have started. And in the resources section, there is a download that includes a slew of books and places and other podcasts that you can listen to. And I would be, it's free. It's free. And so I'd be honored if you took advantage of that. This is the ministry that I've started to help Christians, especially, but not exclusively, who fight against doing what they don't want to do. Check it out, veritasrecovery.org. So with that said, let's talk to Heidi Mills. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for joining the Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic podcast. I'm excited to have you here. I just continue to be amazed at how God brings people like you across my path. And so I'm honored that you would share your story with me and with this audience. So thank you so much for being here.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
And so I honestly, you're one of the guests that I want to focus on your story. And I kind of joke that we'll chase rabbits where rabbits want to be chased. And we'll kind of go where the Lord leads us. But I would just like to open it up because you had this really long, really detailed Substack post, which we will link in the show notes in the description. But for those who haven't read that, I'd love for you to just walk us through your journey with realizing, hey, I have a relationship with alcohol that I need to change.
Yeah. It's kind of hard to know where to start, but that article was my coming out, so to speak, coming out publicly. I don't think I had really even told my friends, hey, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Obviously my husband knew because he'd been walking alongside me, but that article was me reflecting on my relationship with alcohol and the idea that I had in my mind that I think a lot of us feel this way, that we need to hit rock bottom to make a change, that it needs to be bad enough. And I really couldn't see that in my story. And so I just kept giving alcohol the benefit of the doubt, much like I've done before with toxic friends. And so that's how I kind of equated it in the article, is that this was a toxic friend that I let stay in my life for way too long.
Yeah.
But alcohol came into my life when I was a teenager, and it was I was very irresponsible and pretty normal, teenage drinking. We drank to get drunk. That was the goal.
You don't really have many other goals.
Yeah. You're not enjoying a good glass of wine. So, I lived in a small it's not super small, but a small Texas town where that was pretty much what we did in high school. And I took it so far that I ended up at a ranch, a Mormon run ranch in Utah, where they put us through the 12 steps, but it wasn't a choice. And I think the only good thing I got out of that was, is it step number 2, where you're like, oh, there's a higher power, and I'm, right. Yeah. So that's pretty much the only thing I took out of that experience.
So interesting though. I'm curious. So everyone around you was noticing it as well back then?
Well, no, just my parents.
Okay.
It was not just alcohol. So there were drugs as well.
Yeah.
And this was pretty normal in the sphere that I was in, but I think my parents were like, this is a problem.
Right.
So I went and lived on this ranch, and they forced us through the 12 steps, and I came home not an ounce changed on the inside. I played the game really well. I made it through the rest of my high school and then moved out of the house and kind of went full bore into all of that again until I got pregnant at 19, and that was a very clear stopping point for me.
Hmm.
And then after my son was born is when I recommitted my life to Jesus. And that was a very transformational experience.
Sure.
Like, it was not just I said a prayer and something was different. Like, I felt completely different. And that was it. I was thinking, cool. I just was set free, healed, and delivered, and that's not a problem for me anymore. Um, in my 20s, I met my husband, we got married, we were part of a ministry that said it was okay to drink as long as it wasn't public.
Mm.
But we didn't really drink very much in our 20s. I was pregnant and nursing for 10 years, so that was just kind of not part of my life, you know?
Right.
And then
Right.
somehow in my 30s, we end up back in Texas and alcohol's everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're with the church or not with the church. It's at every function, barbecue, and it just kind of creeped back into my life as um, a normal part of socializing. And I was coming with this idea of, well, I can be responsible with it now.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
So had you when you got back from the 12-step program, the ranch, had you said, okay, I'm not going to drink again?
Not at all.
Okay.
No. It was a very forced experience, and so
Meaning when you say not at all, meaning you made the commitment that you wouldn't at all, or not?
I
you
didn't make the commitment
Okay,
that I
gotcha.
wouldn't. No.
Gotcha.
I played the game. I went through the thing that I had to go through. I finished the program. There was no
Yeah.
transformational change internally because I hadn't chosen it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, like, you just can't make people do something.
Which we can pause there for a second. I think is really important. I mean, I think, as people are listening to this, I think I have a lot of prayers for you if you're listening to this. But one of my prayers is that it would be something that is really done from the inside out. It's
It has to
not
be.
from the outside in. And because, and I've told this story before, but my wife, my wife could have, in a sense, forced me into a treatment program or whatnot. But she made the conscious decision that she's like, I'm not going to do that. Like, and she chose the harder life in the immediate because she knew that if and when that change happened from the inside out, then it was going to be lasting.
Yeah.
And so I think that's important for people to hear, and I think your story already echoes some of that. I had a sister who went to a Christian, teen challenge program in Louisiana. We were living in Wisconsin. She was drugs and alcohol and sex and just everything, right? And ironically, just like you, she comes back within months. She's pregnant, and it's like, just back to everything. So I think that's an important point.
Yeah, and you and I both know, like, the alcohol isn't the thing. The drugs are not the thing. And so when you're just behavior modification, changing the substance and your relationship to it without doing the deeper work, it just doesn't matter.
Yeah, you can change the environment and things will look great. You know what I mean? Like, in that environment where you're on a ranch or you're in a program and stuff, and you're not dealing with the crap of life, yeah.
There you go.
Exactly. Okay, so you're in your 30s.
So in my 30s, it just
and
kind of
when you say it
back
started
in.
creeping back in, by the way, like, what did that define creeping back in?
I wish I could tell you. I really don't have very clear. It wasn't a defining moment because, again, I didn't have in my mind, like, you can never touch this again. I didn't have that. I had whatever was going on with you when you were young was fixed. Shabba dabba that away. And, now as an adult, you can be responsible if I am consistent in my ability to think that I'm above things. Like, that's just all throughout my story whenever I'm writing it. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I thought that wasn't gonna touch me."
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I don't really know. It just was a part of the culture. Um, we live in wine country,
Hmm.
so it was everywhere. It was very social. It's not like I was, like, drinking bottles of wine, I'd be out with friends and have a glass or 2, and then, like, in my late 30s, this uptick happened, and that was almost imperceivable to where it was occasional to all of a sudden it was nightly,
Mm.
and there was this transition that I now needed to wind down from my day and have a glass of wine, and you
Right.
create this habit, and your brain relies on it.
Hmm.
So I was in a really stressful job, and that was my way of coping with the stress, which I thought it was going to help with the stress. And that uptick continued for a couple years. But in the article, I also mentioned that there were other things going on that I wasn't aware of at the time. Um, and this is very public. Like, my husband and I talk about this on our podcast and other places, but he was involved in an emotional affair. And so my nervous system was picking up on the incongruencies, which was
Mm.
very uncomfortable. And the way that I would silence that was just have a drink.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, so that uptick was, I mean, I really haven't gotten honest enough to, like, super dig into how much was going on, but I mean, there was, like, 1 or 2 glasses of wine on a regular basis, and
Which I think, and by the way, like, you know, for people that are listening, what I want you to hear there is it's not about the amount, right?
yeah,
In that some people may listen to this and they 1 or 2 glasses a night. God, I'd kill to go down to 1 or 2 glasses a night, right?
sure.
And 2 things that are important. A, our bodies are all different, right? So your
Mhm,
1 or 2 glasses, maybe 3 to 4 to someone else, right?
mhm,
And 2, I would say the comparison game keeps us so trapped. And 3,
mhm,
it's about the place it occupies in our lives, right?
absolutely.
And so I don't care if it's wine, I don't care if it's Oreos, I don't
Yep,
care if it's porn, right?
yep,
If you need that thing in order
mhm,
to get through X or to stop Y, that's a problem.
yeah,
And so I love that you're saying that. It's like, it got to the point, and I interviewed someone in my book who said the same thing. She's like, I wasn't getting wasted every night.
yeah.
And so I think to the world, quote unquote, it's like, oh, you're not getting wasted. Like, what are you talking about? What's the
What's
problem?
the problem? And the thing that you said about comparison is we can do this everywhere in our lives. As
Yeah.
you look around and you can always find somebody who's doing it worse,
I like to say,
And
there's only one worst alcoholic in the world. And like the race for numbers 2 through 25 is like not a race you want to be in.
yeah, so you can always look around and see somebody who really has a problem and
Right.
kind of make yourself feel better about why you don't have a problem. But I think for me, um, it wasn't yet. That didn't happen yet, but there would just became like the internal nudge of this is out of alignment for you.
Yes.
And there are definitely stories and times where I had way too much to drink. Like
Sure.
that's in there too. It just
Right.
wasn't a regular occurrence. And all of this was very socially acceptable.
Yeah.
None of my drinking was not outside of the norm at all.
Yeah.
And this is meanwhile being very involved in church.
Right. And so I think so you start like what was in a sense your conscience telling you, what was the Holy Spirit starting to whisper to you in this period?
I wish I would have listened to any whispers in that period. I didn't. So
Mm.
what happened was in 2019, the infidelity in my marriage blew up. It got exposed. It blew up in the whole community. It was a big deal. And my physical body was feeling the stress of the previous years and then the trauma of that. And so I go to a doctor because basically I'm driving down the street and my GPS tells me to turn left and I can't remember what direction left is. That's
Wow.
and I think I'm having a stroke, you know. I'm like, I don't know what's happening. So I go to the doctor and she's like, "You're really stressed. Your adrenals are not working."
Wow.
And so I had to do a pretty intense healing regimen, and alcohol just was not on the list of approved items. So it wasn't I didn't listen to a whisper. I waited until everything totally fell apart, blew up, crashed and burned, and the doctor said, "In no way, shape, or form do you get to have any alcohol for a year."
Interesting.
And so the physical symptoms were bad enough that I was able to hear that, even though it sounded really hard. Before that point, I think I'd done a whole 30, you know,
Yeah.
and just waited for the 30 days till I could have a glass of wine. And I'd always feel better without it, and my skin would look better. And then, right when the 30 days was up, there I'd go back to having a glass of wine. So, thinking about a year without it and how intertwined it was with my relationships, I was, that seemed really daunting, but it was a non negotiable. There was so much healing that had to happen.
So unpack that a little bit. I think people listening to this, I think there's a variety of reasons you may take a break from alcohol. And I think a popular one nowadays is health, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't disparage that, although I think I go back to what you said is, use that if you need to use that to kick it off, great, but then make sure you do the work underneath. But explain, at least in your understanding, okay, you're in a sense having a nervous breakdown. Why is it bad to have alcohol while you're trying to heal? Like what's your understanding there? We'll be right back after this.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, so I don't have the best understanding, but what was happening in my body was basically my adrenals had been overfiring for so long that they'd completely shut down. My cortisol had been overfiring for so long, it was tanked. So I had like zero cortisol, my adrenals weren't firing. When that happens, your adrenals need to keep working. So what they do is they strip from other parts of your body. So they'll strip your gut lining and strip your DHEA, and it basically causes this whole host of symptoms that is just miserable. And a lot of it is regulated in the liver. And so you don't want to be taxing the liver with alcohol. And also, alcohol, strips the gut lining as well. So it was just kind of like, there's no room for this right now.
Right.
You need to rebuild your body. And that is the opposite. But even still, even hearing that, I wasn't like, okay, this is gone forever. It was like, okay, 1 year. I can do that.
Right.
Yeah. And
So
meanwhile,
you get to that point.
Yeah. So meanwhile, like a year and a half of that time period, I'm going through deep, deep healing, like doing trauma work and all of that. My husband and I are doing our recovery work. It's very, very difficult. So there's all of the digging deep happening. Going into my childhood and all the stuff, all the things,
Been there.
Yeah. It was gutting. It was a gutting experience that I'm so grateful for, and I would say I'm a completely different human now after that. And so a year and a half goes by. We're kind of moving to a place of like peace and stability in our relationship. I'm feeling better physically, so I'm like, okay, social drinking can come back. Yeah. So
Yeah.
then So then between 2022 and 2024, I returned to drinking socially. Now, that whole time that I was taking a break and I'm doing all this deep work, there's no way to ignore the things that you were turning to. So I had to completely rewire my nervous system and I had to understand what I was doing before to try to regulate my nervous system. And so I was aware that I'd been using alcohol to do that. I'd been using alcohol to help me in social situations, to kind of help me loosen up or whatever we think it does. I had
Right.
a bunch of stories built around what I thought it did for me. Um, and so it's just shocking to me to be sitting here and walking through the story and going, "Why did I ever go back?" You know?
That's and I think it's a really good point. And there's a section even in my book where I talk a little bit about this from a spiritual perspective, right? And I think part of there is this weird thing, and it is when I say this weird thing, like it is a known thing, right? It's this cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
where we can know something, we can
Mhm.
believe something, and we cannot do something, right?
Mhm.
And yet, like tale as old as time, right? I mean, I think that's what
Yep.
Paul's
Absolutely.
calling out, right? They didn't call it cognitive dissonance then,
Right.
but like it is. So you can do and you can do the work. You can go to trauma therapy. You can do all this stuff and
Mhm.
know, hey, I was using this thing to cope, and yet then still eventually get to a place where you say, I I can control this.
I can
Like,
control it now, and I think that's where I was like, "Okay, well, now"
right now I
again,
know.
"now I know, and I'll just do it differently, and I can moderate this, and I won't be using it for that reason. It won't be like a coping. It's just gonna be in addition to my life or enhance social situations or whatever the story is." Somewhere in that time frame, I can't remember exactly where, but I started seeing posts about sober living and alcohol-free living. They were showing up in my Instagram feed, and I did not want to see them. I was
Mm,
like, scroll, scroll,
not interested.
not interested. But then I'm like looking, and some of them are people I know, and they're telling
Mm,
their stories, and I didn't even know they had a problem.
mm.
And then there's all these other women that are probably 10 years older than me, and I'm looking at their photos and I'm like, "Gosh, they look great. They're really healthy. They're having fun." And so I kind of allowed slowly. It was just like this very slow process for me where I just started listening and paying attention and allowing another perspective in. And I think that somewhere in there is when I came across Annie Grace from This Naked Mind.
Mhm.
And uh, talk about cognitive dissonance. Her information is so confronting.
Yeah.
So confronting, it's just science.
Yep. And if you
So
don't know who Annie Grace is, I mean that's a great point. Like she really approaches this from a
mhm.
science backed thing about your health, really, and what it does to your brain and
Yeah,
your system and all
and
that stuff.
it's totally without shame, which I think I really appreciate the conversation these days around alcohol, because for me, just and I know that being an alcoholic and that kind of language resonates for some people, and it is their path out, but for me, it didn't
Yeah.
resonate. Like, I would not have found myself going to an AA meeting or
Right.
calling myself an alcoholic or anything like
Right.
that. So, the way that she approaches it is just evaluate your relationship with alcohol, you know? Is it what you want it to be? And also, here's some scientific information.
Yeah.
And so one of the first things I heard from her was that the good feelings that you get from alcohol last about 18 minutes.
Mm.
And that's about the time that we all reach for another drink.
Yeah.
And so I just started paying attention to my own patterns during that time when I went back to social drinking after taking a long break. And I'd have a drink and I'd notice when I wanted another one and I'd look at the clock and it would be like 18 to 20 minutes after I'd had my drink. And I was like, "Oh, wow. I am not in control of this thing. This,
Mm.
this is a thing that is happening outside of my choices, and I think I'm making these choices, but I'm not really." So, that was really confronting, and also when I went back to the social drinking, the way it impacted my body was just horrible. So,
Mm.
for that 18 minutes of good feelings, I would feel terrible for a week.
Yeah.
At least for days on end. Like, it wasn't just the next day, and it didn't have to be a lot of alcohol. It just the way it was hitting my body was completely different than before. I think has something to do with age or whatever. We're not gonna get into that, but whatever the reason, it just
Right.
like, the recovery my workouts would be terrible, I'd feel awful, sluggish, all the things for days. For what? For 18 minutes? Like, it just
Mm.
stopped making sense. So there
Yeah.
was just this really slow process of me going, why would I? do that. But then I've got all these strong stories built about what it does for me and, how it's enhances my life and it makes celebrations more fun. And alcohol for me is so tied into relationships and girls' trips and laughter and connection. It's just real positive stuff.
Right.
And so it could, like, for me, it just wasn't okay, I'm just not going to do this at all. I had to figure out, what does it look like if I don't?
And so what, you have all those stories you've told yourself, right, about
Mhm.
what it does for you. How did you get to the point of, yeah, and you have this beautiful, vivid story you tell in the beginning of your piece, but how do you get to the point where you finally overcome that cognitive dissonance? What does that
Yeah.
look like?
Yeah, so it's very slow. Again, there were other that's the only fact I can remember right now, the 18-minute one, but there were other ones that
Yeah.
came into my feed, and I'm paying attention, and I'm listening, and I'm kind of comparing with what I think and seeing how it doesn't add up. That's that cognitive dissonance where you're like, "Wait, the belief I have built around this is not in line with my experience. So something's wrong." And I kind of just really backed off where I wasn't drinking very much at all, and I would go out with friends, stay sober, go out with friends, maybe have a drink, kind of pay attention to my patterns. That's where the stories started coming up. Like, that's the continued drinking was a gift to me because it helped me unravel the lies,
Mm,
where you're in a social situation and you think, "Oh, I need to have a drink for this to be fun." And then you stop and go, "Wait, why?" When
yeah.
I was a kid, I didn't need alcohol to have fun. Like, where did that switch where we now need something else to have fun?
Yeah, think about the most fun you've had in your life, and they probably happen in your younger years, right? Like, just where
Right.
your sense of enjoyment is just, and it's like you're not drinking back then.
Nope. So why, for some reason, we become adults and we think this is what makes situations fun. So then fast track to last July. So July of 2024, it's a friend's birthday party. We're out at a beautiful place in the hill country here in Texas, and the sun is setting, and we're on a patio, and this place is known for its wine and wood-fired pizzas. Like, it's such a vibe. And I have a glass of wine, and I immediately reach and pour for like a second half glass without even thinking. And internally, I have this check, just a pause internally, and I'm thinking, "Why did I do that?" And I don't know, it was just like this lingering feeling, so clear, like, "This is not in alignment for you."
Mm,
And I woke up that I didn't get drunk, I don't even remember getting buzzed, like, I woke up the next day still with that, like, lingering feeling, and I just thought, "Okay, I'm gonna take another long break." I still wasn't ready to say I'm done with this completely. I'm just gonna take another long break. So I take another long break. I end up at a retreat in September with a bunch of other women, and I had a um, really encountering time with God, and it was just so clear, like, just be done. And
yeah.
so I left that retreat, and I was like, "I'm just done. I'm not gonna drink anymore, probably ever again." And that was 9 months ago.
What did you come back and tell your husband about that decision? How do you explain that to him? How have you explained it to others?
My husband and I didn't really have a super clear conversation about this, along the way. This was all internal.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm trying to remember when I told him, like, "I think I'm done with that." It was probably after that retreat in September, and then this was really hard. In January of this year, we went away to kind of plan for the year, and we had planned to have a conversation. Because one thing I forgot to tell you was, this is in the article, but I didn't say it. Uh, when we were early on in recovery, one of the other reasons I really had to put alcohol on the shelf was not just my health, but it, it lowers your inhibitions, which means I was really easily triggered, and I
Mm,
would I would lash out at him, like, my anger was justified. I'm not trying to say that being angry was wrong because I don't believe that, but had I not had the alcohol, I wouldn't have wielded it the way that I did.
Right. Right.
And so it was really clear that this had no place in our recovery. And in January of this year, he was able to tell me, like, how that impacted him. And that
Mm,
was such a hard conversation, but really beautiful to have, but also to hear, like, "Oh, I hate that I let that 18 minutes
yeah.
that I wanted to feel better open this door for, the harm that you experienced from me."
And so I think, there's this, I want to read something that you wrote because I think even as you're telling this story, I think I know, I was going to say I'm hoping, but I know there's someone listening who will see themselves in this story. And yet you have this paragraph right towards the end of your article that I want to read, and says, I can't help but look back and see what I once ignored. Those times I drove home more impaired than I wanted to admit, laughing it off the next day, imagining myself as the next headline in some homeschool mom's gone wild highlight reel. But what was I laughing at? The fact that I'd made it home, that I'd gotten away with it, that I could ignore the consequences because I wasn't as bad as other people.
Mhm.
I see it now, the way I let alcohol blur reality. And so I think what is so important about your story is your drinking may not look like drunk every night,
Mhm.
uh, you being the one cheating on your husband or being out until all, like whatever. And yet you still cross, I call them crossing the Rubicon, right? You still cross those Rubicons. You
Mhm.
still made those compromises. And I think what I hope people realize from your story is that when you're, again, no matter how much you're drinking, if you are searing your conscience,
Yeah.
right, and it is telling you don't do this, and you're
Yep.
doing it, even if you're not getting drunk, that is going to manifest itself in your life in other ways, right?
Yeah, and I mean, this is it's hilarious because this is the work that I do with women is this soul reclamation, like reclaiming themselves and untying from all of the stories and all of this. Like I have that coaching training and I wasn't using it on myself.
Right? Isn't that funny? You know?
Yeah, and then I start thinking, "Oh, well, when you're living out of alignment, like you're saying, when you're out of alignment with what your soul is telling you to do, it is exhausting. You're going to create burnout."
It, exactly, right?
Mhm.
So I want to go back to the title of your piece because I think it's really interesting, and maybe I want to give you a chance to explain it. You said leaving my most, a glass half empty, leaving my most abusive relationship. How, in a sense, then, how were you describe this as an abusive relationship? How can you describe it like that? Like, what is it about the
Mhm.
relationship that was abusive? Because I think some people would be like, well, I don't see any bruises, in a
Sure.
sense, right? Like, there's
Yeah.
no visible bruises. What do you mean this
Yeah.
was an abusive relationship? Explain that.
So I equate it to the toxic friend, and I don't know if you've ever had one of these, but I have. And they come into your life and they are just amazing. Like they love you so well, they make life better, it's fun. And then it's just certain things happen along the way and you keep wondering why you feel worse when they've left. You're making up excuses for them even though they're hurting you, they're causing a lot of harm, but you're kind of defending them and saying, "Oh, no, no, it's not them, it's probably me." So that's kind of
Yep.
the metaphor that I was using with alcohol. But for me, I think I kept regurgitating stories that it enhanced my life when it
Hmm.
really was taking so much more than it was giving. And that's how it was a toxic or abusive relationship is it was taking so much more of me. And it was like when you're living like that where your conscience is telling you to do something different and you're not, that is such a discrepancy within your soul. Like you can't be living the fullness of who you are that way at all. So me giving up alcohol was again like a bit of a soul reclamation for me so that I can be who I was created to be fully without anything dulling my senses or changing how I interact or whatever it is that I think. Most of the stories that I believed were marketing, really good marketing.
It's funny. I was just going to ask you. That's literally was my next question. I was like,
Yes.
where did those stories come from
Mhm.
for you?
Yeah, which pissed me off when I realized it. And I was thinking, oh, these are not stories I created. These are stories I ingested from really good marketing. And marketers are selling us poison, and we are defending it. We defend alcohol we create this persona of an alcoholic person.
Yes.
And in that way, we defend this substance that is very toxic to our body. It's highly addictive. It doesn't matter who you are. Like, don't talk to me about addictive personality. Like, have you ever drank more than you wanted to? Have you ever
Ever.
noticed? Yeah. Have you ever noticed a time in your life where your drinking increased and you're not an addictive person? So yeah, that part really pissed me off when I realized that it was just programming, and that's probably made me so angry because of my high control religion background as well. I'm like, gosh, another place where people were putting stories into my mind. You're not gonna have that, you know?
Right. Right.
So that was really kind of like the end point for me where I was like, I'm not drinking this Kool-Aid anymore.
And I know people who listen to this podcast have heard me say this before, but I think it's important to reiterate in case you're listening for the first time. But, you talked about we create this persona of what an alcoholic is, right? And that, I spend a whole chapter on that because it's so important is that when you think alcoholic, you being whoever, there's no doubt that there's a certain person, there's an image that comes to mind. And guess what? It's not you.
It's not you.
It never is
the
you.
Mom who's hiding vodka in the laundry room,
Right. It's the mom getting pulled over for DUIs.
Yeah.
And not being able to, walk a straight line. But I'm not doing that.
Yeah. I have it under control. Like the amount of times in that article that I try to let everybody know that I would say, I have this under control. I have this under control. If you have to be saying that so much to yourself, do you really, And
yeah, thus doth protest too much, right?
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
And then the other thing that really got me was just the amount of mental energy and mental gymnastics that it was taking up, whether to drink, to not drink, how much to drink, where to drink, what to drink. It was exhausting.
And I think to that point as well, what we talked about an alcoholic looking like is, I joke that I use the term in my book, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. And yet I fully admit I take an entire chapter to say that's not the best term to use. But I joke that Confessions of a Christian with Alcohol Use Disorder is not a catchy title.
Not very catchy.
But really what I want to do is really, and I'm not trying to I'm not here like Oprah, like you're an alcoholic, but the definition changed. Right.
Okay.
And it has changed in the DSM-5, which is the manual of addiction in the healthcare field. And it's no longer a binary thing. It's no longer, are you an alcoholic or not? Are you drinking too much or not? It now is alcohol use disorder. And the things that you outlined, the questions are intentionally like, have you ever drank more in the last, I think it's like 12 months. Have you ever drank more than you wanted to, than you set out to? And then you answer that yes and one other question yes, and they're like, hey, you're on the spectrum. And that scares people. And I guess I'm like, I hope it does. Right?
It should. And I think that's where we keep ourselves stuck is that picture of the alcoholic or the person who really has a problem. It's never going to be us. We're never going to be the one in that photo. We're just going to be the ones who had a little bit more than we wanted to.
Yeah. And that's normal, right?
Yeah, everybody does that.
Exactly. We'll be right back after this. When it comes to what was the hardest, I think for some people, I asked this question like, well, there was withdrawals, there was, whatever. But what was the hardest part of making the decision and saying, I'm done? I'm done. This is it for good. I'm done. What was the hardest part in the immediate aftermath of that for you?
It's still there, and it's the reframing of my life
Mm,
and finding, you know, I don't know if you wanna go here on this conversation, but in the midst of all of this that happened over the last few years is also the deconstruction and reconstruction of my faith, and so shifting communities and friends and activities and trying to build a new way, what does that look like? I'm
mhm.
still in the midst of it. I get pockets of it where, um, I meet these women and we have an amazing time, and alcohol's never in it, never in the picture. But it's just kind of like the rebuilding of the life after and knowing that it's going to be okay if it's different.
Yeah.
I'm still kind of figuring that out, and that was the hardest part of the fear of losing friendships, the fear of losing connection of community. Like, when you come out publicly with an article like this, I already feel people, like, pulling back a little bit, and I don't know if that's, I didn't know you had a problem, or I don't really wanna be thinking about this, or, what do you think about me? I don't know what they're feeling. But when you start coming out publicly like, "I don't drink alcohol, and I think it's toxic."
Right. Right. It's funny, guys. I do think there are people who are convicted, right? And listen, my goal, I tell people like, um, I'm not out here saying that you can't be a Christian and drink, that no one should ever like
Sure.
if that is, you know, like if you can, great. And if and you can do it responsibly and you don't feel the health effects or you don't think that like whatever. But it is surprising to me. I mean, I remember when I first wrote about this in June of 24, when I first, like you, came out in an article.
Mhm.
And I remember this guy sent me a message, and a guy who I had seen like drunk during an election night, on Facebook,
Yeah.
being like, there's no such thing as a Christian alcoholic. You just need more Jesus and kind of
Mm.
all this stuff. And I was like, well, ironically, yes, I did need more Jesus.
I
Like
yes.
my priorities were not in line. But here's a guy who I've seen publicly drunk, and it was just obvious to me that he was uncomfortable with the idea.
Mhm.
Um, and I think there are a lot of people like that, right?
Yeah.
And I
And I
hope,
don't yeah, I don't wanna make people I care about uncomfortable.
right.
Um,
Well, that's what I was gonna say is I hope they're not uncomfortable in the sense because they feel like I'm judging them.
yeah.
But if my life naturally calls you to something better, praise God, because it's not the work of me. I can tell you that, right? And
Yeah.
and and so I hope that, maybe there are some people around you, and this would be my encouragement to people listening, is like there may be people around you who are like, that's, it makes them uncomfortable. And I'd be like, you know what? The Lord has blessed me with a lot of new and different
Yeah.
friends.
And so that's what I'm in the midst of, is that transition where there is new and it is starting and it is beautiful and good, but it's not fully there. And so you asked what was the, I don't know how you worded it, maybe the scariest thing, but that was it. Community,
What about
relationships.
family?
Well, my husband doesn't drink at all.
It's great.
So that makes it really easy.
Yeah. Is that something he never did, or is that like in support?
Oh, no, he was never much of a drinker. If anything, he would have half a beer. I think he doesn't have the right enzymes to, uh, metabolize alcohol, so it makes him feel really, really bad. And then I
Gosh, I
think
wish I had those
I
wrong
know,
enzymes.
I know. I have another friend who's allergic to alcohol, and I'm like, "That's amazing."
Yeah.
It's like me being allergic to gluten. I would never touch it. I don't touch it, you know?
Yeah, right. Right.
But that shifted to when that uptick did happen in my life, that then he needed to be the responsible one. So
Mm,
it did shift to that. And he wasn't able to tell me that until very recently, like maybe a few weeks ago. So there is still so much that's being unpacked and unraveled.
yeah.
My daughter follows me on Substack, and she listened to that article because you can listen to it. I know it's long, but there's a really lovely AI bot that reads it to you. Um, and she said, "Oh, I didn't even know you had a problem." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I did and I didn't, you know?"
Right. My problem looked a little different than probably what you think a problem looks like.
Yeah.
And I think, in a sense, that is a great summation of your story, which is you did have a problem. Like,
Yes.
you had a drinking problem. And I think some people are like, you know, and I don't think you're not running away from that. You wrote an article about it. And yet your drinking problem didn't look like my drinking problem. And it doesn't
Mhm.
look like the person who's listening to this nodding their head or shaking their head. It doesn't look like their drinking problem. But when anything is misordered, it is
Yep.
disordered. And in your story it was misordered. It was
Yep.
misordered. What would be your final encouragement to someone who is listening to this and they're seeing themselves in your story?
I really like the way that Annie Grace approaches this, where she just encourages you to start thinking about your relationship with alcohol. Don't change anything about what you're doing. Just start paying attention
Yeah.
and be aware, like be mindful about your drinking, be mindful about your patterns and start noticing what you notice. And as you do that, those stories are going to come up and that cognitive dissonance is going to come up. And you get to confront, okay, I really feel like I need a drink right now. Why? Why do I
Yeah.
feel like I need that? And is that true?
Yeah.
Well, okay, I need a stress relief. Well, is that true? Does alcohol relieve your stress or does it increase your cortisol after?
Yeah.
So that would be
Well,
my encouragement.
and I think the final question is you kind of broached this a little bit, but how would you say what does your relationship with Jesus look like since quitting? How did that affect? How did that go into it? How would you describe that?
It's really interesting and probably a whole nother podcast. But
Sure.
my Substack is called In the Waiting Room because I am very much in the spiritual waiting room. But one thing that has never shifted for me is my connection to Jesus. And that's stayed very strong. The rest of my faith is in flux and on the chopping block a lot of the time. So
Hmm.
I don't know if that's answering your question, but in September, I was not at a Christian retreat. I was just at a retreat. And I very much encountered God with a bunch of women who were not Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the marker for me. It's like it was a very clear reconnection for me that brought clarity in this realm of my life. So connection to
Well,
Jesus has stayed strong.
yeah, and I would say, you know, there's a lot that Jesus can work through. Meaning, like, I've had the Holy Spirit prompt me, while listening to country music. I mean,
Right,
it's and I'm not saying it's not the country music that did that. It
right.
was, he just, I don't think he cares.
Think that boxes
A
get to
lot of
get
times.
blown up everywhere.
What's that?
And God boxes get to get blown up everywhere, and God is a lot bigger than the boxes that we put him in. So,
And he blew me up, that's for sure.
mhm.
And he's been faithful to put me back together. And I pray that same thing, for people listening. I pray for you. I pray for everyone, Heidi, if people want to read that great Substack, I'll have a link to the specific article, but where can they go to find more about what you're writing about?
Yeah, Substack, I have 2 publications on there. So one is In the Waiting Room, and then the other one is my Soul Care 75, which is just a free community experience that I have for women. And
Explain
then
that a little bit, the Soul Care 75.
it's just okay, it's kind of the antithesis of the 75 Hard. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I did it. I did it once. I don't think I didn't quite make it 75,
Yeah.
but that was like one of my last big attempts to stop drinking.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
I
like we
gave it up for
do.
like 30.
Yep, like we do. So Soul Care 75 is like the complete opposite, and it's just slowing down. And we do one thing every week. There's one focus for the week, and the whole process is just to help us slow down, reconnect, and move forward in a different way. It's everything that I learned recovering from burnout.
Mm. Well, great. Well,
So
Heidi, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for being radically vulnerable and honest. And I know that there are people listening who this will help. And so I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
18 minutes. I think that stat is so interesting. 18 minutes. That's how long the benefits of alcohol last. And then we start feeling the side effects, right? And so then 18 minutes later, we try to drink again. And I think that just blew me away. And I know that some of you may have read Annie Grace's This Naked Mind, which is not necessarily coming from, well, it's not coming from, I don't think, like a Christian faith-based perspective, meaning that's not the that's not kind of the basis that it uses to try to convince you about what alcohol is doing to you. Comes more from a science-backed approach. But I love some of those facts, right? Because I think they are important. And I think it just awakens you even more so to what the devil tries to do to so many of us with alcohol. Something that gives us 18 minutes of quote-unquote benefit. And so many of us will throw so much away and reorient our lives around it. And I think it's just an awakening fact. I really appreciated Heidi's honesty. You can go check her out. I've included her information in the show notes, and appreciate just her vulnerability to finally, in a sense, quote unquote, come clean. That's kind of what she called it and said. So Heidi, thank you for your radical vulnerability. If you are looking for more, you can go to christianalcoholic.com. christianalcoholic.com has my book. It does have a link to that nonprofit ministry that I've started now for people like me, people like you, Veritas Recovery. And so you can find the link there, or just go to veritasrecovery.org. Thankful, as always, to Life Audio and lifeaudio.com for making this podcast possible. You can go over there and check out as well some other great episodes. We will see you here again next week.